You've been lied to about happiness. Not by conspiracy, but by something more insidious, the architecture of modern consciousness itself. And the evidence is hiding in plain sight, in every moment you've tried to savor but couldn't, every experience you've documented but never truly felt, every achievement that dissolved into emptiness the instant you attained it. Consider this. It's Friday evening. You've finished a brutal work week. You have no obligations, no emergencies, nothing demanding your attention. You have permission, finally, to enjoy yourself. So you open Netflix. Scroll for 20 minutes. Nothing feels right. You check your phone. Scroll more. Order food you don't really want. The evening evaporates. The enjoyment you expected never quite materializes. It's as if someone changed the locks on pleasure itself, and you're standing outside with the wrong keys. These aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of something far more disturbing, a fundamental corruption in how modern humans relate to experience itself. And here's what makes this truly alarming: we've normalized this corruption so completely that we've stopped recognizing it as aberrant. We think we're broken when actually, it's our entire orientation toward life that's been quietly dismantled. In 1925, a German philosopher named Josef Pieper wrote something that should have served as a warning. Working in the aftermath of industrialization's complete colonization of European consciousness, Pieper identified what he called the inability to be at leisure, not the absence of free time, but the psychological incapacity to inhabit it. He noticed something peculiar: people were becoming functionally unable to experience anything that didn't serve a purpose, advance a goal, or produce a result. Leisure, true leisure, the kind where you're fully present to experience itself, was becoming existentially impossible. Pieper wasn't talking about laziness. He was identifying a cognitive mutation. Modern humans, he argued, were developing a kind of psychological architecture that could only process experience through the lens of utility. Everything had to be for something. A walk had to be exercise. Reading had to be educational. Even rest had to be productive rest, optimized for better performance tomorrow. The capacity for what he called simple beholding, pure receptivity to experience without agenda, was atrophying like an unused muscle. Here's where it gets interesting. For most of human history, enjoyment wasn't a problem requiring solution. Our ancestors didn't need self-help books about presence or mindfulness apps. They weren't any happier necessarily, but they possessed something we've lost: the cognitive architecture for direct experience. When they ate, they ate. When they celebrated, they celebrated. When they rested, they actually rested. There was no meta-layer of consciousness constantly evaluating, documenting, optimizing the experience itself. What happened? How did an entire civilization lose the capacity for something as fundamental as enjoyment? The answer lies in a subtle but catastrophic shift in how we've been trained to relate to time, experience, and consciousness itself. And once you see this mechanism, you can't unsee it. It operates in every aspect of your life, every moment of every day, quietly stealing your capacity for satisfaction. Let's start with the most obvious culprit, though not for the reasons you think. Technology didn't destroy our ability to enjoy life because it's distracting. Distraction is a symptom, not the disease. The deeper damage comes from how smartphones restructured the phenomenology of experience itself. MIT researcher Sherry Tickle spent 15 years studying how digital technology changes human consciousness. Her findings are genuinely disturbing. In studies conducted between 2008 and 2015, Tickle documented something she called the Goldilocks effect, the compulsive need to be connected but not too connected, present but not too present, engaged but maintaining escape routes. Participants consistently demonstrated an inability to fully commit attention to any single experience. Even in moments they reported wanting to enjoy, conversations with loved ones, meals, experiences they'd anticipated, subjects exhibited constant low-level anxiety about disconnection. Not anxiety about missing something important. Anxiety about missing anything. The average participant in Tickle's studies checked their phone every 6.5 minutes during activities they'd explicitly chosen for enjoyment. But here's the crucial part, they weren't checking for anything specific. They were checking as a form of existential reassurance. The phone became a kind of psychological escape hatch, a permanent reminder that this moment, whatever it is, isn't final. You can always pivot. Always exit. Always find something more stimulating, more validating, more engaging. This creates what philosophers call divided consciousness. You're never fully where you are because some part of your attention is always held in reserve, always monitoring, always ready to redirect. Enjoyment requires surrender. It requires the temporary dissolution of that monitoring consciousness. It requires the risk of full presence. And we've systematically trained ourselves that full presence is dangerous. Think about this for a moment. When was the last time you did something pleasurable without some part of your mind narrating the experience, evaluating it, planning how you'll describe it later, comparing it to other experiences, wondering if you're enjoying it correctly? That metaconsciousness isn't reflection. It's a defense mechanism. It protects you from the vulnerability of pure immersion. But there's something even more insidious happening, something that predates smartphones and social media. The real corruption began much earlier, embedded in the psychological architecture of modern productivity culture itself. In 1967, American sociologist Sebastian de Grazia published a study that should have fundamentally altered how we understand leisure and enjoyment. He examined time diary studies across 12 industrialized nations and discovered something bizarre. As nations grew wealthier and people gained more free time, reported satisfaction during that free time actually decreased. People in 1967 with 35-hour workweeks reported less enjoyment of leisure than people in 1927 working 55 hours. This violates basic logic. More free time should equal more enjoyment. But de Grazia identified the mechanism behind this paradox: guilt. As productivity became the dominant cultural value, leisure transformed from a natural human state into something requiring justification. Free time became conceptually inseparable from waste. The phrase, killing time, entered common usage. People began experiencing non-productive moments not as relief but as existential failure. This is where Pieper's diagnosis becomes prophetic. We haven't just lost the ability to be at leisure, we've pathologized leisure itself. Your struggle to enjoy life isn't a personal failing. It's the inevitable result of internalizing a value system where worth is measured entirely through output, contribution, achievement. Under this framework, enjoyment becomes suspect. It produces nothing. Advances nothing. Improves nothing. You can see this corruption in the language we use. We don't say, "I spent time with my family." We say, "I invested time in relationships." We don't read for pleasure. We consume content. We don't rest. We recharge. Every potentially enjoyable activity gets reframed as instrumental, as a means toward the real goal, being more effective, more productive, more optimized tomorrow. And here's where it gets truly disturbing. This reframing isn't just linguistic. It actually changes the neurological structure of experience itself. Neuroscientist Judson Brewer at Brown University has spent 20 years studying the neuroscience of reward and satisfaction. His research reveals something profound about how anticipation and enjoyment interact in the brain. When you're anticipating pleasure, thinking about that vacation, that meal, that achievement, your brain releases dopamine. This feels good. It motivates approach behavior. But here's the mechanism most people don't understand: dopamine isn't actually the pleasure chemical. It's the seeking chemical. Dopamine creates desire, not satisfaction. It generates the feeling that something good is coming, that pursuit will lead to reward. The actual experience of enjoyment, neurologically speaking, involves a completely different system, mediated primarily by opioid receptors and serotonin. These systems produce contentment, satisfaction, the sense of enough. And here's where modern life systematically sabotages us. We've created a culture that continuously stimulates the dopamine system, the seeking, the anticipation, the pursuit, while actively suppressing the mechanisms of satisfaction. Every notification, every social media scroll, every productivity hack, every optimization strategy triggers seeking. The next thing. The better thing. The thing you're missing. Brewer's studies show that people who report chronic dissatisfaction don't have broken pleasure systems. They have overactive seeking systems. Their brains have been trained to extract pleasure from pursuit itself, making actual arrival neurologically unsatisfying. You're chasing experiences you can't enjoy because your brain has been conditioned to find the chase more rewarding than the catch. This explains why achievements feel hollow. Why vacations feel stressful. Why you scroll even when nothing interests you. Your brain isn't seeking specific outcomes anymore. It's addicted to the state of seeking itself. Consider what this means practically. You plan a dinner with friends. Before it happens, you feel good, anticipation, dopamine. During the dinner, some part of you is thinking about work tomorrow, checking your phone, mentally rehearsing conversations. After the dinner, you feel vaguely disappointed, though you can't articulate why. The experience was fine, but it didn't deliver the satisfaction that the anticipation promised. The problem isn't the dinner. The problem is that your neurological systems have been trained to extract all the available pleasure from anticipation while being unable to metabolize the experience itself. You've become like someone who gets high from reading restaurant menus but can't taste food. And this is compounded by another mechanism, one that operates at the level of identity itself. Psychologist Daniel Gilbert at Harvard conducted a series of experiments in the early 2000s examining what he called affective forecasting, our ability to predict how we'll feel in future situations. The results are humbling. People are systematically terrible at predicting what will make them happy. Not just slightly wrong, wildly, consistently wrong. In one study, participants predicted how happy they'd be after achieving various goals, promotions, relationships, purchases, experiences. 6 months after achieving these goals, actual happiness levels bore almost no relationship to predictions. Sometimes people were more satisfied than expected. More often, significantly less. But the really disturbing finding was this: people didn't learn from these prediction errors. Even after repeatedly discovering that achievements didn't produce lasting satisfaction, subjects continued making similarly inaccurate predictions about the next goal. Gilbert calls this miswanting, pursuing things we believe will make us happy but actually won't. And here's why this perpetuates: in a culture organized around achievement and progress, admitting that achievements don't satisfy feels like admitting failure. So we do something psychologically ingenious and destructive. We explain away the lack of satisfaction as temporary. I haven't achieved enough yet. The problem isn't the goal, I just need the next level. This creates an infinite regress. Every achievement that fails to satisfy becomes evidence that you need to achieve more. The possibility that achievement itself might be the wrong framework for happiness never gets seriously considered. It can't be. To question the value of achievement in an achievement-obsessed culture is to question your fundamental worth. You see this in how people talk about their lives. Once I get the promotion, I'll be able to relax and enjoy things. Once the kids are older, I'll have time for myself. Once I pay off these debts, I'll start living. Life becomes an endless series of prerequisites for enjoyment, conditions that must be met before you grant yourself permission to be satisfied. But neuroscience reveals something crucial: satisfaction isn't the reward for meeting conditions. It's a skill, a capacity, a muscle that atrophies from disuse. Every time you defer enjoyment until conditions improve, you're actually training your brain that present circumstances are insufficient. You're reinforcing the neural pathways that produce dissatisfaction. This is perhaps the cruelest irony. In trying to build a life worth enjoying by endlessly optimizing conditions, you destroy the very capacity to enjoy whatever you build. Let me show you how deep this goes. In 2019, researchers at the University of California studied something they called hedonic flexibility, the ability to extract enjoyment from a wide range of experiences. They compared two groups, people who rated themselves as generally satisfied with life despite modest circumstances, and people who rated themselves as chronically dissatisfied despite objectively comfortable conditions. The difference wasn't optimism or temperament. It was something more fundamental. Satisfied individuals demonstrated what researchers called attentional allocation flexibility. They could fully invest attention in whatever experience was currently available. Dinner with family. A walk. A conversation. They didn't need peak experiences or optimal conditions. They possessed the cognitive ability to find sufficiency in ordinary moments. Dissatisfied individuals showed the opposite pattern. They had what researchers termed conditional attention. They could only engage fully with experiences that met specific criteria of novelty, intensity, or social validation. Everything else received partial, evaluative attention. This wasn't conscious. They weren't trying to be dismissive of ordinary experience. They had literally lost the neural architecture for full engagement with the non-exceptional. And here's what makes this tragic: the dissatisfied group wasn't clinically depressed. They functioned normally by modern standards. They worked, maintained relationships, pursued goals. They had just internalized so completely the idea that life's value lies in extraordinary moments that ordinary experience, which comprises 98% of existence, became effectively invisible. You spend your life waiting for the moments that count while the only moments you actually have slip past unnoticed. This connects to something philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls the tiredness society. Han argues that modern exhaustion isn't primarily physical. It's what he calls soul fatigue, the exhaustion that comes from being perpetually in performance mode, perpetually on, perpetually generating identity through achievement and display. Social media intensified this but didn't create it. The underlying mechanism is what Han calls self-exploitation. You're not being forced to perform by an external authority. You're voluntarily, even enthusiastically, transforming yourself into a project that must be continuously worked on, optimized, displayed. There's no rest because there's no boundary between you and the work of producing yourself. And here's where the inability to enjoy life becomes inevitable. Enjoyment requires temporarily abandoning the project of self. It requires periods where you're not working on yourself, not improving, not documenting, not seeking validation. It requires what Han calls profound boredom, not the restless boredom of waiting for the next stimulus, but the deep boredom where self-consciousness temporarily dissolves and you become permeable to experience itself. But we've pathologized profound boredom. We've filled every gap with stimulation. We've made the dissolution of self-consciousness, the very condition for enjoyment, psychologically unavailable. Ask yourself, when was the last time you were genuinely bored? Not frustrated with waiting, not restlessly seeking stimulation, but that deep, almost meditative boredom where time slows and consciousness loosens. For most people, the answer is years, maybe decades. We've eliminated every condition under which that consciousness arises. And in doing so, we've eliminated the condition under which enjoyment itself becomes possible. Now, before we go further, I need to acknowledge something difficult. Everything I've described so far might make you feel hopeless, like your capacity for enjoyment has been permanently damaged, like modern life has fundamentally broken something that can't be repaired. That's not true. But the path back requires understanding something that will initially seem paradoxical. You can't fix the inability to enjoy life by trying harder to enjoy life. The effort itself is the problem. Enjoyment isn't achieved through optimization or technique. It emerges when certain conditions are absent, when you're not evaluating, not performing, not pursuing, not documenting. It requires a kind of surrender that feels, in the context of achievement culture, like failure. This is why all the standard advice, practice gratitude, be mindful, live in the moment, often makes things worse. You add, be present, to your optimization checklist. You measure your mindfulness. You feel guilty when you catch your mind wandering. You've turned enjoyment itself into a performance metric. The real solution starts with recognizing something uncomfortable. you've been colonized. Not by a conspiracy or system you can blame and reject, but by a set of values so pervasive, so normalized, that they feel like reality itself. The belief that worth comes from productivity, that time must be used, that life is something to be optimized rather than experienced, these aren't natural laws. They're recent historical constructions. And you've internalized them so completely that they've become your default way of experiencing consciousness itself. Decolonizing your capacity for enjoyment means first recognizing the colonization. It means catching yourself in those moments when you're evaluating experience instead of having it. When you're thinking, am I enjoying this enough? When you're comparing this moment to other moments, when you're already planning how you'll describe this experience later. None of that is consciousness. It's performance. And the first step is simply noticing the difference. Here's what that looks like practically. Start by identifying one activity, just one, that you do purely for its own sake. Not because it's healthy, not because it's productive, not because it makes you more interesting or impressive. Something that exists entirely in its own moment with no justification beyond the doing of it. For me, it's making coffee in the morning. Not optimized coffee from a technique I learned online. Not Instagram-worthy pour-over. Just coffee, made the way I make it, while doing nothing else. No phone. No podcast. No planning my day. Just the sound of water, the smell, the simple physical movements. 10 minutes where I'm not working on myself or working on anything. 10 minutes of what Pieper called simple beholding. It feels, initially, like wasting time. That discomfort is the signal. That's the colonized consciousness resisting. Your job isn't to make the discomfort go away. It's to practice being present with it until it dissolves on its own. Second practice, implement what I call documentation fasts. Choose one experience, a meal, a walk, an evening with friends, and commit beforehand to not photographing it, not posting about it, not describing it to anyone. The experience exists only in its own moment and then in memory. Not because photography is bad, but because you need to rebuild the neural architecture for experience that exists solely for yourself. The first time you do this, you'll notice something disturbing. Part of your attention has been outsourced to your future audience. You've been experiencing life as material to be harvested for presentation. Without that frame, you might find yourself unsure how to relate to the experience itself. This is good. This is the atrophied muscle starting to wake up. This is harder than it sounds because it requires confronting the anxiety that emerges when you're not advancing anything, not working on anything, not improving anything. That anxiety is what you've been running from. Enjoyment lives on the other side of it. Fourth, practice what philosophers call useless attention. Look at something, a tree, a painting, another person's face, with no agenda beyond looking. Not to appreciate it, not to understand it, not to decide if you like it. Just sustained, purposeless attention. This feels alien at first because you've been trained that attention must be instrumental, must serve some function beyond itself. Enjoyment is what happens when attention stops being instrumental. Fifth, create deliberate situations of profound boredom. Go to a park with no phone, no book, no activity. Sit. Not to meditate, not to think deeply, not to achieve anything. Just sit. Let the restlessness come. Let the anxiety about wasting time come. Let the mental narration come. Don't fight any of it. Just notice it. Over time, weeks, months, that restlessness gives way to something else. A kind of spaciousness. A quality of consciousness that's become completely foreign to most modern people. That spaciousness is where enjoyment lives. Not excitement, not stimulation, not the dopamine rush of pursuit. Enjoyment. Satisfaction. The sense that this moment, exactly as it is sufficient. But individual practices aren't enough, because this isn't just a personal problem. The inability to enjoy life is systematically produced by structures that require constant production, constant consumption, constant self-optimization. So we also need systemic changes. We need work cultures that don't treat rest as a luxury or productivity hack but as a human right. We need educational systems that teach sustained attention instead of rapid task switching. We need technological design that respects human consciousness instead of exploiting its vulnerabilities. We need economic structures that don't require endless growth, endless consumption, endless acceleration. These aren't utopian fantasies. They're features of societies that exist right now. Countries that have implemented 4-day work weeks haven't seen productivity decline, they've seen satisfaction increase. Communities that have created tech-free spaces report higher quality relationships. Individuals who have established boundaries around constant connectivity report both lower anxiety and greater life satisfaction. The research is clear, our brains and social systems are rigged against enjoyment. But they're rigged by human choices, which means they can be re-rigged by different choices. This isn't about nostalgia or rejecting modernity. It's about recognizing that the current configuration is producing mass psychological suffering and choosing, deliberately, to construct different conditions. Within this sobering diagnosis lies genuine hope. Because if the problem is conditioning rather than human nature, then reconditioning is possible. Your capacity for enjoyment isn't permanently destroyed. It's dormant. And dormant things can be awakened. Let me tell you about someone who did this work. Her name is irrelevant because she's representative of thousands I've encountered. Mid-career professional, objectively successful, chronically dissatisfied. She described her life as fine but empty. She did all the right things: therapy, meditation apps, weekend workshops. Nothing changed. What finally shifted wasn't a technique. It was a realization. She was at her daughter's school play, phone in lap, responding to work emails during the performance. Her daughter looked at her from stage, excited, vulnerable, seeking approval. And she realized she was choosing work over this moment not because work was urgent, but because she had lost the ability to be present for anything that wasn't productive. She put the phone away. Not forever, not as a grand gesture. Just for those 2 hours. And something cracked open. Not enjoyment immediately, but its prerequisite, the recognition that she had a choice. That her attention was hers to direct. That every moment she gave to productivity performance was a moment unavailable for experience itself. That was 4 years ago. She still struggles. Still catches herself in performance mode, still feels the pull toward constant optimization. But she's rebuilt capacity. She can now inhabit ordinary moments fully. She doesn't need peak experiences to feel satisfied. She's recovered what our culture trained her to abandon, the ability to find sufficiency in what's actually here. So here's the question you need to answer, the one this entire conversation has been building toward: what are you willing to sacrifice for the capacity to enjoy your own life? Not, what would you sacrifice in theory? What will you actually give up? Because make no mistake, recovering enjoyment requires sacrifice. It requires giving up the identity of the optimized, productive, impressive person. It requires tolerating the anxiety of not advancing anything, not working on anything, not getting anywhere. It requires the vulnerability of full presence. Will you trade the dopamine hits of constant seeking for the quieter satisfaction of sufficiency? Will you trade the performance of life for the experience of it? Will you risk the profound ordinariness of actually being here? This isn't easy. It's practice, like building physical strength. You don't go from sedentary to marathon ready overnight. You start small. Those 10 minutes making coffee. That one undocumented experience per week. That evening of deliberate uselessness. Each time you choose presence over performance, you're not just having a better moment. You're reconstructing the neural architecture that makes enjoyment possible. Because here's the truth we need to face: life is mostly ordinary moments. If you can only engage with the exceptional, you're missing almost everything. The question isn't how to make life more exciting. It's how to recover the capacity to find the ordinary sufficient. This week, I challenge you to implement just one of these practices. Not all of them, that's optimization thinking again. Just one. Pick the one that makes you most uncomfortable, because that discomfort is the signal. That's where your colonized consciousness resists. That's where the work is. And here's what I want you to do after trying it: share your experience in the comments, but not in the way you usually would. Don't tell me it was good or helpful. Tell me specifically what discomfort emerged. What did you notice yourself avoiding? What anxiety surfaced? Because the work isn't in achieving perfect presence. It's in noticing the mechanisms that prevent it. The next time you find yourself thinking, "I should be enjoying this more," that's your signal. You're not in the experience, you're evaluating it. That meta-consciousness, that gap between you and your life, that's what we've been trained to call normal. But it's not normal. It's learned. Which means it can be unlearned. Every time you choose full presence over partial performance, you're not just having a better moment. You're reclaiming your own consciousness from systems that colonized it. You're rebuilding capacity that culture systematically destroyed. You're recovering the ability to inhabit your own life. And that's not self-help. That's not optimization. That's liberation. Now tell me, what will you choose?